This is a new and strange environment at first, suddenly finding yourself in orbit.
I'm Neville Andrew Mera, and this is Never Normal, a show about breaking free from the boring default plan and living life on your terms instead. My guest today is Justin Gary. Justin is a dear friend of mine. He's also an award-winning game designer, author, speaker, and entrepreneur. Justin is the CEO of Stoneblade Entertainment and lead designer of the hit game Ascension. This week marks the 10th anniversary of Ascension, and Ascension Tactics, Justin's latest game, just closed a successful round on Kickstarter, raising nearly $500,000 worth of pre-orders, more than 3 times the original goal. There's a lot I want to talk about in terms of making games and making them successful and how you got to there, but I'm sort of curious where you were supposed to be at this point in your life. Like if you had listened to, I don't know, your parents or school teachers or, those kind of influences that we all have. Like was everyone telling you, hey, you should be a game designer from when you were a little kid, or what was,
Oh no,
what was the default path?
very different path, my friend. So both of my parents are attorneys, and my stepdad is also an attorney. And
Oh,
I
wow.
was always destined to be a lawyer. That was what I was born to be. That's what I was supposed to be. I went to, I was the captain of my debate team. I actually went to law school. I was in high
Oh,
school.
wow.
High school, I was voted most likely to disagree with anything you say. And so,
That's a dubious honor.
yes, indeed. I've mellowed out since then. But I went to the most expensive law school in the country at NYU Law. I was, that was my path. And it was only through a very sort of difficult realization and break that I was able to kind of veer away and drop out of law school and become a game designer.
Did you know what type of law you wanted to practice, like from a young age? Was it something that you were like actually passionate about yourself, or was it just like this is the thing, I got to do it to make mom and dad happy?
Yeah, not really. I mean, I did love debating, right? I love, sort of breaking things down into their component parts and kind of figuring out the truth of what's going on and looking at things from different angles. And I enjoyed that process. But when it came to law, I like the types of law I was most interested in was international law and constitutional law and like basically law of things that doesn't really exist, right? Like the most esoteric stuff.
Yeah.
Things that interested me the most. I remember in law school, one of the classes I really enjoyed was one of the most boring sounding names. It was the administrative and regulatory state. Right? Sounds like you
Yep.
like bang your head against the desk. But what it was
Yep.
was like showing you behind the curtain of like how laws get made and like how the system works. And so as a gamer, intrinsically it was like, oh, okay, I can see how you like manipulate these things and get this stuff done and how like the whole kind of how the whole system came together, and that kind of system design was fascinating to me, which again will come into play here as
System
develop.
system design, and also, I mean, law is not a career I associate a lot with creativity. Certainly there's elements of, creativity in creating an argument or something like that, but it sounds like even within law you latched on to the part that allowed for some of that
Yeah,
creativity.
that's right. And there's some other things about law that are really interesting to me. I mean, again, for people who are passionate about, something specific that they want to do, they want to help people, they want to, have a specific thing there. I don't want to discourage everybody from being lawyers, but I want to discourage many people from being lawyers because I think that there's, one, it's sort of this default path for a lot of people, in my family.
Yeah.
But, you got plenty of choices for career. You could be a lawyer, a doctor, or a dentist, no problem. And I think that lawyers, a lot of what your job is to always be thinking about the worst case scenario, right? To always be thinking about how somebody can, screw you over, what could go wrong, how do you defend yourself against these things, and that training for your brain, I don't think tends to lead to a good life. Like it doesn't tend to lead, like if I'm always looking for what can go wrong in any relationship, in any business deal, I'm always trying to sort of find these angles. Your brain's going to look and find those things everywhere in the world. And so I found that happening to myself a little bit. I didn't like who I was when I was really in law school and kind of thinking in those terms all the time.
That's really fascinating. I've never thought about that specifically about being a lawyer, but I think about that same exact idea all the time, and I associate it more with just like an engineering mindset because that's exactly what we're trained to do. Especially, I used to work in IT security, and it was the exact same thing. Any situation that you face, it's like, okay, well, how could this go wrong? or even simple engineering. Like if you're, I don't know, building a bridge, right? Like building the bridge is not really the engineer's job. The engineer's job is to figure out everything that could go wrong with the bridge if the wind is coming this way, and like there's an earthquake at the same time, and two cars are spaced this far apart. Like this one really weird edge case could happen, and then it all comes crashing down.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right, and I mean, to some extent, this is true in all aspects, right? An entrepreneur needs to be thinking of the same things, right? What can go wrong in my business? Where are the threats in the environment, from other, whether it's competitors or the economy or the environment, like some amount of that is healthy and valuable, but being careful to not let that become your dominant mode of thinking, and being able to see the things that can go right, and also recognizing that, I mean, maybe not with the bridge, maybe I want you to be really careful with the bridge, but with things, if the stuff goes wrong, it's not that bad. You'll be able to recover it. It'll be okay. And so I think that type of mentality ended up becoming very, very critical. And I've trained myself that way as a designer, right? That's when you're designing and creating something new, you will fail 100%. Like it's going to happen again and again and again. And I create, the first few prototypes of games I make are always terrible. And then when I reiterate them and then be like, okay, now it gets a little better, now it gets a little better. And then eventually you can get to something that works. And that mentality is super empowering because, in all careers, right? Whether you want to learn to play an instrument or write a book or whatever you want to do, you're going to have these failures and you're going to have these kinds of setbacks and challenges, but none of them are fatal. They are a necessary part of the process. And if you are able to focus on that learning and growth and have faith that the end result is not going to be the same as the starting point, you really can have a pretty amazing life.
I think there's probably been a lot in your life that's led you to believing that. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree, but I think those are values that intellectually I'm with you on, but I think it's difficult, and it's like an everyday practice to actually embody those, right? I mean, going back to the engineer example or the lawyer example, like I've had plenty of friends and me at a point in my life where I see a girl at a bar and you want to go talk to her because you think she's cute or something, and they're like, yeah, but maybe she has a boyfriend, maybe she's in a bad mood, maybe, and you come up with this list of like 100 things that could go wrong, why you shouldn't do it, and you talk yourself out of it. And as you said, for most things we do, in our lives these days, there's no saber-toothed tiger around the corner that's going to eat us. Like these things aren't life and death. And especially if you're a creator or some kind of creative person, in order to get better, you have to be willing to keep putting stuff out there and trying and maybe not like hard failing, but doing something that isn't perfect and then iterating and making it better and making it better.
Yeah.
How did you get to that? I mean, so you're in law school, you enjoy games. Were you playing games seriously at that point? Like where?
Yeah, so I started playing games seriously well before that. In fact, I played games obviously with my family, and we were a pretty competitive bunch in general. Some cutthroat
bunch of lawyers in the family.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, it was my parents.
I guess the Monopoly rule book came out more often than usual.
Yeah, they trained me well. They did not let me win when I was young. I had to win for myself, and if I could out argue my way and to a point, that then I'd get what I wanted. But I discovered a game called Magic the Gathering, when I was 16, and when I was 17, I won the U.S. National Championships, and that sort of catapulted me on this different path where I started traveling around the world and playing in tournaments for money, and that's how I paid my way through college. And so I ended up getting this exposure to this whole other world. And it did a lot of things for me. One, of course, it sort of built me connections in the gaming industry. Two, it gave me a way greater breadth of experience. Just being able to sort of every other month I would be in Tokyo or Sydney or Rome or London, and with everybody else is like flipping burgers or hanging out hanging out at each other's houses or whatever. And so that was all great, but it also really taught me the value of failure, because I would be playing games where I'd have $10,000 on the line and I would make a mistake, and you have to live with that, right? And that lesson gets driven home very quickly, and you go back and you play again. And in fact, even the best players, you're losing a good chunk of the time, right? Maybe a majority of the time, even in a lot of scenarios, and that's just an unavoidable part of the process of playing games and playing at the highest competitive levels. And so you have to get comfortable with failure. And the best players, I saw the biggest distinction, by far, the biggest distinction between the people who succeeded and the people who didn't were the ones who would learn from those failures and take those lessons and then apply them in the future. Like it's very easy in a game like Magic. So for those that aren't familiar with it, the easiest way to describe it is sort of a combination of chess and poker, where you get to build your own deck before you come to the table, right? And so there's
That sounds a lot less nerdy than like the casting spells and like mana and like ogres and mages that I associate with it, but chess and poker.
yeah. It's I again, depending on my audience, I can describe it in different ways, but yeah, the basics of, from a sort of logical strategy kind of standpoint, that's the closest way to think about it. And so you have a lot of cases where, because it's like poker, right, you could get lucky or unlucky or a bad draw, and it could lose you the game. And for a lot of people, that psychological out of, oh, I just got lucky. Mm-hmm. This guy's just, he's lucky, he's not really good, or this thing happened. Whereas in reality, if you had made a different play 3 turns earlier, that luck wouldn't have mattered, because you would have put yourself in a position where it didn't matter what you drew that turn. Right, or a variety of situations like that, where you could be like, oh, actually, if I just represented to my opponent like I had this, then they would have played differently, and then I would have been able to capitalize on that. Right, dissect things at a deep level and say, in every situation that I was in, I would take the frame of, okay, what could I have done differently? Is there anything in that scenario that I could have done differently to change those probabilities or put myself in a better position, or even to see in the situations where you win, where, oh, actually, I won there, but that's only because I got lucky. And if I had done this 3 turns earlier, I wouldn't have needed that lucky draw at the end. And that forcing myself through high level competition to learn that lesson again and again and again and again, I think was a really valuable way where that started to drill home that idea of failure and learning and repetition that I think has served me pretty well over the years.
And so you were a teenager at this point, and you were basically competing. I had no idea there was that much money in Magic to begin with, first of all, but you were competing at this high level in Magic. And so you were basically then finishing a game or a tournament, and then just like going back to your hotel room and sort of tearing down what happened and what you could have done differently, or what did that, how did that
One
look?
of the best things also there, I mentioned sort of, building a network of people. Like I found really smart friends. I found people that were better than me. In fact, when I went to college, I grew up in Miami. I went to college up in New Hampshire, and the best team in the world that at that time was in Boston. And so I would drive to Boston to go play with them and like learn from them and work with them. And then we would dissect those games in between rounds. We wouldn't even go back to the room. Like in between rounds, we'd be talking about our games. Or if you were a featured match, and that would be like live, streamed. Or back then it wasn't live streaming, but the same. Be broadcast, and then we would dissect it right there. And so having smart people around you that can help you and help analyze what you're doing, kind of little, magic mastermind in that situation. Valuable. And again, those people who, when you go through the fire together, right? When you play in these tournaments and you compete and you kind of have to, we battle against each other too sometimes. That builds not only your character, it reveals the character of the people that are around you. And then some of those people are the very same ones that I started my company with and started working together and building things down the road. And so that is sort of another great piece of it where, this is something I've also learned when the one job I had when I was working at another company and working for somebody who was, a little bit of I describe him as a Bond villain. Our CEO was kind of like both equal and competent. It was pretty amazing.
Were there like single monochrome like gray outfits and stuff too, or did he have like a hairless cat?
Yeah, no, but going through that, when you have this sort of crazy person at the top and a lot of like challenging infrastructure, the people who you knew you could rely on, like the people who would like do what they said they'd do and would deliver and you could work with and that you could trust, those people, those relationships became amazing. And again, those were the first people that I hired when I started my company, or that I would go work with in partnership in other areas. And so finding the people who you can struggle with successfully, who you can go, that's where true friendships and really powerful bonds could be formed. So that was another upside of the Magic career, I think.
When you describe it like this, I can totally understand the poker chess analogy. And when you listen to like the top, let's say, chess players in the world, right, the grandmasters, not only do they analyze their own games like this, but they actually know like historical chess games or even like current chess games. They can tell you like move by move what happened, where someone made a mistake, even if it was 20 moves before the game actually ended, because they're, as you said, like playing it out strategically long term and seeing, oh yeah, well, there's some luck, there's some whatever, there's some entropy and unpredictability, but you could have done this thing at this step. Is that something you learned watching the other kind of top players at that time? You just like surrounded yourself with them and just had this like immersive.
As far as the why did I react the way I did and learn that skill set, I don't know. I think some of that was there. I think some of that did come from my parents and from those early games sitting around the kitchen table playing. It was always like that they wouldn't let me win, but they would like help with the sort of dissecting of the breaking down of stuff, and so I think that some of that came around the kitchen table, and I just always had a competitive drive in me, and that drive to compete and win required you to face these things, right? Either you're going to sort of crumble and lose, or you're going to take the lesson from the loss and be able to kind of come back and do it again. So I think it's partially from early upbringing, partially from modeling the people around me who were successful and seeing how they behaved, and partially from that just intrinsic joy of like debating and dissecting things. I think that's just part of my DNA, is that something that I think we share, sort of being able to take something and kind of analytically kind of break it down and look at it from every angle and kind of like say, okay, here's how everything kind of fits together. And now I can put it back together again. For me, that's just fun.
You said earlier something that struck me, which is you perhaps lose more often than you win, or at least you have to get used to losing. That's just part of it. And I think, most of us probably haven't spent a lot of time watching Magic the Gathering tournaments, but or even competitive gaming, tabletop gaming. But it made me, what you just said made me think back to Andre Agassi's book Open, and he talks a lot about that also, is that like, one person wins the tournament, but everybody there is a professional tennis player, and all those other people lost, basically. They didn't win. They might have come in second or third or fifth or whatever, and they might be great, but they didn't win. And so you have to just get used to that. And I guess some people just, as you said, crumble under that, but others are able to kind of separate the ego and the pain of like, oh, I lost or I didn't win. That sucks, from the analysis, just that cold hard, like what could I have done differently? Sometimes it's just an unlucky break, but there's still some strategy and all of that. I can totally get how that makes you successful as a gamer. But was there some moment where you decided that like, I don't want to just play these games, I want to make these games? How did that, was there like an aha moment, or how did all that come about?
Yeah, in some ways the situation kind of forced itself upon me, that created this opportunity, and in some ways I had to decide and make that moment and leap. So the way it went down was I had finished my first year of law school, and I was pretty miserable. I mean, it was probably the most. I'm a pretty happy guy by default, but I think that was the most unhappy I think I'd ever been. I had put on like 25 pounds. I'd actually thrown my back out from reading in the library. I didn't even know that was possible, but it happened.
It's got to be the world's nerdiest injury. How did you hurt yourself? Did something go wrong at the Magic the Gathering tournament? No, books in the library.
I threw my back out for 2 weeks just from like bending over and reading.
I shouldn't laugh, but sorry.
Yes. I could laugh at it now. So anyway, I finished law school, and then in the summer, you're supposed to kind of go get an internship at a law firm. But there was this company called Upper Deck that was out in San Diego, and it was they were working on a brand new game, a new competitive game called Versus System, which used Marvel and DC Comics characters and battling and whatever. And so they contacted me, as well as a bunch of other Magic pros and like top tier gamers, to come and like, try out the game and like give them feedback and kind of work on it a little bit over the summer. And so like an all expenses paid trip to San Diego for the summer sounded amazing, right? So I was like, yeah, sure, no problem, I'm in. And so I go out to San Diego, and I just have the time of my life. I mean, I'm like, every day I'm walking out by the beach, I'm talking with, a lot of these same smart people that I was chatting with, would talk about, Magic and things back in the day. We're breaking down what's going on. And then, now I have this sort of new problem of figuring out how do I, designing games is different than playing games. There's this whole other creative process, and I had to kind of analytically break that down and think, okay, wait, how do I make this fun, and how do I make this something that will sell, and what does the product look like? And I was just having a great time thinking through all this stuff, working through it. We did that for the 2-3 months, and then at the end of it, they said, hey, listen, we think you're really good at this. If you want, there's a job here for you. And so that forced the question. Right. And I had to go. I was like, I don't know what to do here.
Were you still a student at that point, or had you already graduated law school?
My first year of law school. This was the summer after my first year of law school. So law school is normally 3 years. The first year is the hardest by far. Everybody says that. It's like, everything after that, it's like kind of the same stuff over and over again, basically. But, So I finished the first year, and then I actually go back after the end of my internship, and I have to make this decision. And it's like, okay, well, do I go leave law school and go start a job? And I, my parents are obviously very clearly, and they know that's crazy talk. This game thing was fun. Let's go get real. Don't drop out of law school. It's like you're in the top law school in the country. You should go, finish your law degree, then you can, figure it out after that. And now keep in mind, when I say top law school in the country, I mean top most expensive. It's $50,000 a year that I'm spending and taking on in debt for this. Because that's what you're supposed to do. And so I go back, and I'll never forget. So I go, and there's a career counselor at the law school, and so I go to get advice from the career counselor, and I'm
who's not in any way going to be biased towards you continue. They have no skin in this game, right?
Story, because I go and I have this conversation, and I sit there and it's like, listen, I have this real dilemma, and I explain the situation. I've got this opportunity in San Diego, do these things, and the counselor stops and looks at me. It's like, what are you still doing here? And I was like, pause, and I realized, it's not that that's someone who becomes a law school career counselor is somebody who graduated law school but didn't want to be a lawyer anymore, and so they're a career counselor. So they actually have a very different.
So they understand you.
And the truth is, it's not. When you really think about it and break down what's the worst thing that can happen, you can leave law school and come back anytime in 5 years and leave pick right where you left off. They just come back. I wouldn't miss anything. I wouldn't miss a beat. But if I'd left this opportunity to go become a game designer and try that out, then who knows if that opportunity shows up again. And so I made that decision at that time. And my mom, it was hard. I don't want to, it sounds in retrospect, it's like, yeah, duh. But at the time, it was so. And if the sort of point of this podcast is to break people out of their normal patterns and to see that there's these other paths that are available. I got lucky to some degree that the path kind of showed itself to me, but it's the pain and the resistance and the challenge of breaking out of that normal path is very real. My mom cried when I told her, that I was leaving law school, and the pressure to kind of conform to what society expects of you, whether that's family or friends or people around you, it's enormous and it's real. And that resistance is the thing that you have to kind of focus on and overcome. And so breaking it down and saying okay, what's the real harm here? And they're realizing there was none. Literally, I'm a year, I spend a year.
You're going to save $50,000 a year and make money.
$50,000 a year. I'm going to make $50,000 a year. I'm going to do something that's awesome. And so, really being concrete with understanding what the real consequences are. And then again, the consequences on the other side, I have something I can do that I'm very excited about and passionate about. And I didn't put it this way at the time, but the thing that I really try to focus on now is what is it that gets you energized, right? What is it that where you're getting up in the morning and you're excited about the day and that you have that energy and enthusiasm? Because that's the key. That's the clue that tells you you're on the right path. If you spend, it's not that you're going to love everything about your job or that you're going to love every day. Sometimes days are rough, but if you're consistently getting up and you're dreading getting up and hitting that alarm clock and trying to snooze and not being willing to get up and face your day, you're not excited about what's going on, you are on the wrong path. And if you are excited about stuff, even if it's tough, even if you're having trouble, but you're still enthusiastic and working, I can work 10, 12-hour days and I don't mind it most of the time because it's just, I love what I'm doing. I'm excited about it. And that view is a really great indicator for people to know, what the path they should be taking is. So that's where I made that key decision and made the leap of, the first of a few really key decisions that kind of put me on the path I needed to be on.
I'm imagining you selling this decision to your mom and just laying out the logical argument first, permission to approach the bench and then come with this sort of this is why I should do it. But I agree. And I think that's a lesson, what you just described, that's taken me 36 years more or less to learn. And that's that you're not a robot, and it's not the decisions are not happening independent of you. You can say oh, this market is hot right now, or this career is a good career, or in the case of entrepreneurs, we talk so much about product market fit. This is what the market wants, this is the right product and all that. But the founder or the person or yourself, you have to have energy and enthusiasm towards that. That's not just sort of a nice to have little, oh yeah, I also happen to enjoy it, because that actually determines whether you'll be successful or not, because you will hit some snag at some point along the way, or you'll run up against your mom. And if you can't really convince her that this is a good idea, it's yeah, you know what, right, you're right, Mom, I should just go back to law school. If you don't have that enthusiasm for whatever you want to do.
Everywhere. One of my favorite books on this is the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Talks about this, and he's primarily in the context of writing, but it applies to everything. And it's just that there's always going to be resistance around doing things that are hard, around doing things that are meaningful and challenging, that like your soul is calling for. There's tons of forces, and whether that's the pressure from your parents, whether that's the fact that your business isn't succeeding and you're losing money, whether it's the fact that your boss isn't, a pain in the ass, whether it's the fact that you're ill, or you've got to deal with a bunch of stuff and you have crying kids in the background, whatever. There's always things that could pull you away from your path, from the things that you really need to do. And there's always excuses that can come up. And if you don't have that energy and that enthusiasm and that drive, you're going to get pulled off the path. The obstacle is going to stop you. Right? Obstacle is only, what are the obstacles, are those frightful things that you see when you take your eyes off the goal, right? It's a very key challenge. And I've heard stories of people that, it is possible to kind of make a business that's just like I'm just here to make money and I don't care about what I'm doing. I'm just, trying to find. I know people that have done that, or at least they self-describe as doing that, but not very many. I mean, it is the vast majority of the people that I know personally that have succeeded are the ones that have done something that they're passionate about and just don't quit and work through it. And yeah, you're going to shift and pivot and move, exactly what you're doing and exactly the market you're trying to do. You're not going to get it right, as I mentioned. You're going to have to fail and iterate and move forward. But it's following that path of passion, in this sort of smart way where you're creating and iterating. For me and most people I know is the path that really leads to success. And it's ironic, right? 'Cause I want to sort of pause on this point a little bit, because thinking, well, okay, no, I'm going to pick the best market and I'm going to pick the thing, and I just want to kind of solve for X, where X is the most dollars to take, right? And that seems like the logical thing to do, but in practical reality, humans don't work that way.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. That's a better way of putting it. That like you're in that equation also. You can't just solve for X and you're just solving and you're not part of the equation. It's Justin Gary Games. Your name is on the door. You have to care about it. And for those who are able to build businesses where this doesn't apply, I think you're right. I think those are few and far between. But I also think they tend not to be these sort of creative, like pour your soul into it businesses.
Some resellers, and they're like, just like all I'm doing is like connecting other products and whole.
They're jumping on an opportunity, and it's like, if that opportunity is there and you have a chance, maybe, but most of us are trying to like create something. We're rubbing two sticks together and like hoping for a spark. You need that energy behind it.
It's a powerful frame that is not intuitive, and it's not something that you get taught in school. And so I think it's a really useful way to kind of drive forward. And, and again, you can be smart about it too. When I say like follow your passion, I don't mean, drop everything and go start just playing music for money down the streets or whatever. Like there are ways to do this that are smart. When I left law school, I had the ability to go back, right? I had a job. When I quit that company to start my own, I had a year's worth of savings saved up during that time, right? Or I knew I could go get another job if I needed to. Like I think you can be smart as well as passionate, right? I think you can set up for that, the myth of the entrepreneur as extreme risk taker, I think, is somewhat corrosive to people, because the goal of an entrepreneur is actually to minimize risks. You want to find these things that reduce the probabilities, reduce uncertainties at the lowest cost possible. And so and the same thing with game design, this is one of the great things, and the principles of it is like, when you're designing something, you want to get your iteration cost as low as you can, right? How quickly and cheaply can I get from testing something to getting feedback to building it again and testing it again? And the better that cycle is, the better your product's going to be, the more likely you are going to be to succeed in the long run.
I definitely want to come back to that. I love what you're saying, though, in terms of, it almost sounds like the so-called risky decisions in life are probably less risky than most of us think, right? But then also, again, you're not outside that calculation. You can do things to make them less risky. So you left law school. Did you have a sort of like backup plan of like, if this doesn't go a certain way by a certain time, I'm going to come back to law school? Or you just knew? Did you ask them like, can I come back? Or how did that conversation go?
And they're like, yeah, you can come back anytime in 5 years. We just have a policy. Anytime in 5 years, you could just come back. Just let us know. Just send us a form and you're back. Ta-da. So
right. And make sure to include the $50,000.
And so okay, that was easy. And then
I'm laughing, but I think so many people would get stuck right there. They would just be like, it seems like this sort of black or white, like I'm in law school and I'm down this whole path, or like I left for one semester and that's it, like my future is ruined. And what you're saying is like, oh, this opportunity came up, I decided to follow it for a while, and hey, if it didn't work out, I could just go back to law school. Like it seems so
Yeah,
obvious,
it's
but
like once you see through the veil, it's like, it's pretty easy. I mean, there was somebody in my law school class who was like in their 60s, who was in freshman year of law school. Like, you could do this whatever you want, man. It's okay. So the path is still there, and so in that sense, I could always go back to where I was. And the next sense, I mean, I had a job lined up, right? So I mean, I had a career. I had enough. I knew I could make money already. In that particular jump. And so I had, a large runway of, let's see how this goes. And obviously, if it didn't work out, I did have in my head, like, all right, I'm gonna try this for a year. And if it doesn't work after a year, then I could go back, and I'll have only missed 1 year of law school, and I'll just start up in the semester afterwards. And it was an easy thing, but it didn't take a year. I mean, within months, I was thrilled and doing well and enjoying what I was doing. And there was no chance of me going back after that.
it almost sounds like it was less risky for you to go the way you went, because that job offer wasn't going to be there forever. You're a recent Magic champion, like your name had some draw to it. They were inviting you to come there because of your success. And obviously that success is fickle, right? Like you can't guarantee you're always going to be the one who won the tournament.
I was guaranteeing that I wasn't, because I actually stopped playing Magic when I went to law school, right? Because it was just law school took so much time, and that I couldn't travel and play Magic at the level that I was used to. So I actually quit Magic to start law school. And so I wasn't going to get any more tournament finishes. I wasn't going to be able to kind of continue down that road. And you're exactly right. There was this new product that they were launching with the big Marvel and DC brands. They were in the middle of creating it and getting it kind of out there. These job opportunities existed. And, it's not easy to get a job as a game designer generally. And so that opportunity was there. And if I let it go, maybe I could make it happen again. But it certainly did feel like there was this sort of opportunity, this magical opportunity window that I could take advantage of to accelerate that career path far beyond. I spend a lot of time advising people on how to get into the game industry now. And, both I have the book I wrote, as well as a podcast of my own, both called Think Like a Game Designer. But it's usually like, there's a lot of steps where you want to, you have to get contribute into the community, and generally try to find ways to do work for free and put your products out there, and do iterate before you're getting paid and get into it. And that anybody can follow that path. But I kind of had this jump start, basically, that I would give up if I didn't go down that road.
Yeah. So that was the first sort of like leap of faith that you had to make, which again, now when we describe it, it sounds much less risky, but I'm sure it didn't feel that way, but at the time. But then you said that was the only job you had in the industry, or period, and then you left that and started your own company. How did that come about?
I remember the moment where I made this decision. So I was working on this brand new project. So I was going to create the World of Warcraft miniatures game. And this was sort of, if you've heard of World of Warcraft, this huge brand, and I was making this brand new game, this brand new license thing. And I remember, so I just finished from becoming like a game designer, and I transitioned to be kind of a brand manager to be able to build the product and actually figure out how to get it made and everything. And I'd kind of been getting promoted. And it was my first time going into the executive boardroom myself. So I'm sitting out in the lobby, like waiting. I've got to give this presentation to convince them to do the project. I'm staring at this ugly green carpeting and like awkwardly smiling at the gray-haired receptionist that's sitting there. And then they finally call me in, and I see this huge boardroom. And it's like this classic intimidating giant boardroom, and it was a sports memorabilia company, so there's like a Michael Jordan signed jersey on the wall, and like Babe Ruth's bat, and like Tiger Woods golf club, and it's like, I'm like, okay, cool. And the CEO's, this billionaire owner or whatever, and he's just like laying back in his giant leather chair and this sort of, giant mahogany table, this classic like movie scene, and COO's on one side of the table and CFO's on the other side of the table. And from my perspective, they're like drilling me with their eyes, kind of staring at me. I don't think that's what they were doing, but it's what it felt like. And, I go up to give my presentation, and I know that the room is air conditioned, but I'm hot, my palms are sweaty, and I'm just like, give this presentation. And I prepared quite a bit coming into this. This is like a big deal for me. So I give the presentation, And then I kind of, they're silent at the end of it, and there's like these butterflies in my stomach, like, oh, am I in over my head? This is a huge multi-million-dollar project. What am I doing? And then they start like talking, and they start bouncing the ideas around, and I'm like, okay, cool, they're into this, and they're like, oh, well, what's the market in Europe going to be like, and what are the regulations here going to be? And they start bouncing around. And now I've done a lot of research to this point, and so that's where it becomes clear to me that nobody in that room has any idea what they're doing, like no clue. And at first this is scary. Like at first this is a terrifying moment because I'm like, oh my God, they don't know what they're doing. Like, what if we make a mistake? Like, what if we fail? This is a huge project. Like, I always assumed that there would be adults in the room, like these experts that would tell us what to do and let me know what's up. And I'm, kind of getting like anxiety around this. And then all of a sudden it just transitions to calm. Nobody knows what they're doing. That's not a terrifying realization. That's a liberating realization. Because if they don't know what they're doing, like I can not know what I'm doing just as well, right? I can just, make a decision. And then like leadership is being able to not it's not about being successful or knowing what's up. It's being able to act in the face of uncertainty, like own the results and enroll other people in your vision. And so from that moment, I knew that I was going to quit that job. I knew that I was going to start my own company. And so I spent a year from that moment and I launched the project. We had success. I saved up some money, so I had some time on my own, and then I gave my 2 weeks notice. and I remember the conversation I had with my boss, where I tell her I'm going to quit and give my notice, and she's like, "Well, do you have another job? Lined up?" Like, no. Well, you know what you're going to do? Like, you have a plan? I'm like, not exactly. And it's like, well, but it's a rough economy out there. Are you sure you want to face that? It's like really uncertain. I'm like, well, no, but uncertainty is here or there. I can't protect myself from that. And her jaw just drops and it's like, walk out the room, wave at the receptionist, and start my company.
Same one.
And so it was like that big moment there. And again, similar types of calculations where I don't, I knew I could get another job again if I needed to. I had savings to give myself a year to sort of get me some runway. I didn't know exactly what my company was going to look like or exactly how it was going to work, but I created that space and it was a relatively low risk kind of thing. And, I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't really know what I'm doing, but I've been, I'm willing to sort of own that and again, iterate and try things and move forward. And that really drove home that point at that moment. And it was a key transition for me.
That's an amazing story. I can totally picture you sitting there and just going through all of that. We have those moments where we realize, as you said, that like, yeah, everybody's making it up as they go along. And that, yeah, there are no real adults in the room. And what's the Steve Jobs quote that like all the rules in life or the whole world, it's all made up by people no smarter than you. I think most of us realize that, too late in life, or, we realize that we don't take action based on it. But you saw that and realized that, hey, these guys are officially in charge. They don't have magically all the answers. And it's not, it sounds like now what you're saying is not because they were stupid or incompetent or lazy or any of those things. It's
right,
just
exactly.
Nobody has all the answers.
They were dumb or bad at their jobs or whatever. It's just that like the illusion that they had certainty, the illusion that they knew everything was vanished in that moment. And that's really the key, right? You don't need that illusion. And you can look at it from the other side too. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, even that are successful, that we all have this imposter syndrome, right? We have this sense of like, well, okay, yeah, I'm successful, but maybe I kind of got lucky here and I don't really know and I'm not really sure what to do now, and everybody feels that. And right. This realization can also help you there because that's okay. It's okay not to know. Nobody knows. And so just you solved the problem in the past doesn't mean that the next problem is one that's automatically solved or that even a similar problem is solved in the same way. And so it's just being able to have that open attitude, again, owning the consequences, being willing to face uncertainty and, enrolling other smart people and learning from the inevitable failures. Like if you can do that, that's the basics of the formula. And it really does make all the difference in my experience. I mean, prior to that, we sort of told a lot of my story and in many ways I'd taken some unorthodox paths before that, but they were all kind of laid out for me. I started playing Magic because it was fun, and then I just won the national championships and was like, oh, cool, now I can go make money doing this. I'll go do that, right? And I went to law school because that was the next thing to do. And then a job threw itself at me for game design, and so I kind of went and did that. And then I was working on the project that I liked, and I kind of moved along that track and moved up the corporate ladder. And it wasn't until that moment that I'm like, wait a minute, I don't have to just follow the things that show up. I can create a path. and that was a really big, that was when I felt like I became an adult. So when I realized that the adults didn't know what they're doing. So okay, great, I'm an adult too. Congratulations.
It's amazing when you put it that way, because when you think back to school and just the education that we receive, like I value education, but I think there's something that it doesn't prepare us for, and it's that what you just described, that like, when you go through school, maybe you have projects, you do all this education, you get creative, whatever, but there's like a person, usually the teacher at the end, who's like, yes, you did this right, or no, you did this wrong. Oh, and here's the answer key, here's how I'm grading you. Like there's some sort of like known judge who can tell you that it was right or wrong or whatever. They do have the answers. And then you pierce that and realize that, like, oh, once you get to adulthood, right? Like once you get to a certain point, it doesn't work like that anymore. And nobody knows. It's just, let's try and see how it goes. And I think even confidence is something that we get wrong. Like we think that confidence is having all the answers, or knowing ahead of time or something. It's exactly what you're describing. It's just like, I don't know, nobody does, but I can figure it out. Like I believe in myself enough to be able to figure it out, even though I'm not sure right now.
Ultimate power comes from, so most people are internally focused and externally referenced. And that means that I care about what I get, and I judge how well I'm doing by how the outside world is responding, right? Do people like me? Am I getting money? Am I getting whatever? You judge things like that. And if you can reverse those trends, right? If you can be externally focused and internally referenced, where I know that I can figure things out and I'll be okay no matter what happens. I'll figure out a path. I'll be able to I'm just going to act, out of integrity. I'm going to be able to do these things, and that's going to be great. And then I'm going to focus on adding value to the world. You can do that shift. It's a game changer, because that confidence now comes from this internal source, right? Am I acting in accordance with my values? Am I able to not be afraid of discomfort and uncertainty, right? Like uncertainty and discomfort are inevitable parts of life, and we spend most of our life running from them. And that is an easy thing to say and a very hard thing to internalize. And you and I have had conversations about this before. It's so much about consistently reminding ourselves of that, and being able to train yourself to be like, what is this I'm really afraid of? It's going to be fine. I don't need these necessarily comforts. I purposely keep my expenses low. I purposely don't try to get the fancy cars and all the things that end up becoming traps, because those become the norms. And if I don't have all that stuff, then all of a sudden I feel not enough. I feel, not okay. And, I'm a big fan. Don't be afraid to spend money and have fun,
right?
But don't let yourself become trapped by whether it's money or success or fame or all of the, or this acceptance from others. Like you have to be able to sort of accept yourself. And again, this took me a very long time to internalize, because we all have this, and I certainly grew up this way. It's like, I wanted to please my parents, and I wanted to, be, a people pleaser to people around me, and I wanted people to like me, and that's all totally natural. But the more you can shift from that to this sort of sense of like, I'll figure it out, it's gonna be okay. That's where true confidence and power and peace come from.
I mean, that absolutely. You could just record that and play it on loop for the rest of everyone's lives, and I think that would be a good reminder, because it's one of those things that intellectually I'm 100% with you, but it's a daily practice to remember that, to try to practice that. It sounds like Magic in some ways, I think, kind of taught you parts of that. You get lucky breaks in gaming and in sports, and you get unlucky breaks, and just remembering well, I just got to keep training. I got to keep doing the thing. I got to keep playing my game, not worry what they're doing on the other side of the table or the court or whatever. And just that internally referenced, right? I'm just doing what I know I'm supposed to be doing. Going back to your story for a minute. So you've created your game company. You also, since then, obviously launched many successful games since then, but along the way, you mentioned you've also launched a book and now a podcast, and I believe you have a course forthcoming that are all Think Like a Game Designer?
Just about 2 years ago. Podcast launched about a year ago, and then the online course is launching this year in a couple months.
And so Think Like a Game Designer. So this is for anyone who wants to become a game designer like yourself?
The book is about the universal creative principles. And it's a lot of some of the stuff we're talking about here. How do you deal with fear and uncertainty? How do you get started? How do you overcome obstacles when you get stuck? It talks about what I call the core design loop, which is how you sort of go through that process of ideating and creating parameters and brainstorming and prototyping and testing and iterating. And how do you, and then from there, then it goes into the sort of breakdowns of like, all right, how specifically, how do you make games? How do you get a job in the game industry? How do you, are you able to, whether you're selling your game or producing your game or all that sort of stuff. So then it gets into kind of the nitty gritty of like, I want to be in this space. I want to create stuff like this. So that's kind of the arc of the book.
So for someone listening who's interested specifically in game design, I mean, obviously, buy the book or get it from the library, take the course when it comes out, listen to the podcast, but just give us something actionable. Like where, if I'm a person who enjoys playing, say, tabletop games, or, I get Ascension Miniatures from the Kickstarter and I love it. And I'm like, I want to do this with my life as you've done. It just seems like such a difficult, how do you break into that? Where do you even start?
I'll start with a couple simple principles and actions that anybody can take. So one, if you love games, which hopefully you do, if you want to become a game designer, if not, probably a different path, maybe the way to go. When you're playing games, the job of a game designer is to craft an emotional experience in the audience, right? That's not about the rules or the art or the pieces. All those things are components that come together to craft an emotional experience. So what you want to do when you're a player, just like when you watch a movie, right? When you watch a movie, you get lost in what's happening, right? You lose your sense of identity. You just follow along with the characters. You're blowing, the things are blowing up, or you're laughing, or whatever the experience is. You're lost in it. Same is true with the game, right? Often you're like, rolling the dice and hoping for an exciting thing to happen, or you're hoping for that lucky card draw, or you make that smart move, and right. But what you want to do is when you play your games next, right? Think of like a designer. Step back, and whenever you have a strong emotional reaction, or even better, when you see someone else have a strong emotional reaction, step back and think, what caused that? What about the game? What about the situation, right? Was it the fact that we were all here and laughing and they did something funny? Was it the fact that there was like this tension around something that was a low probability moment that had to draw and had to come out? Was it, the story that evolved from play and these cool components that really made it feel like it was immersive? Start thinking like a designer to start training yourself about what is it that makes games great? What is it that you love in games? Because that's going to then help you decide what kinds of things you want to create for yourself. So that's one thing you can just do. Basically the same stuff you're doing now, which is playing games, but just step back for a moment and see, right? And see what's going on behind the curtain, and you can train that instinct. Becomes really critical. The second thing I will say is you always need to write things down. And around the office, we call this Hunan beef. Whenever we were working on a game, this is a game called Soulforge that I co-designed with Richard Garfield, who's the same guy that created Magic the Gathering, which was a really cool experience for me to be able to work with the guy that made the game that started my whole path. So we're working on the second set for this game, and we're brainstorming around the table, and we're going through ideas, and it's like a multi-hour process. We're doing it, and we're all, and I see somebody at the table just writing things down because I've told my team, like, gotta write things down, super important. And then, we start getting kind of hungry. It starts around lunchtime. We kind of made some good progress. We have a good vision for what we want to do. It's like, okay, cool. Let's set this aside. We'll go get lunch. And then we get lunch. We come back, and then we're working on some other projects. It's like a couple days later before we're able to come back to work on Soulforge. And I'm like, okay, I don't really remember what was going on. So but I know that my team, somebody on my team was writing things down. So I go and I pick up the notepad that he was writing on, and I see what's written on there, and it says Hunan beef, Kung Pao chicken, fried rice. He was just writing down his damn lunch order. Nobody had any ideas. So we totally lost everything we did that day. And so now, literally around the office, whenever we're starting to talk about something, Hunan beef. And so we'll start writing things down and send around notes and stuff. And so I try to reinforce this lesson because everybody has great ideas. A lot of times people think, I don't have ideas. I'm not really sure what's up. And the truth is people just don't take the time to write down their ideas and then come back to them to develop them into real things. And so even when you're just have a random thought when you're playing these games, right? If you're going through this other exercise, you're like, oh man, it was really cool that this guy got to, this moment where they got to draw a card and play the right thing. But maybe it'd be really cooler if they could like look at two cards and keep one they would get a little bit more strategy, and that would be a little bit more fun. And so you just write down, hey, okay, what if we had this game where I took the thing and modified two cards, right? And you can start with your first designs, literally just take a tweak. Modify a game that already exists, right? Don't have to start from scratch. It's okay. Like everybody's afraid of like copying, or they're afraid of being copied. Like get that out of your head, okay? Until you're like way down the road, this is just not a thing. It's people are just too afraid. You cannot help if you're trying to copy. If you're copying something else and making a change to it, you can't help but bring your own authentic self to it. You can't help but make it something that only you could make. If you're just genuinely trying to create a thing. So don't worry about copying other people. In fact, you absolutely should. Same as advice for writers, right? Find the writers you love and then just copy their style. And then eventually you'll develop your own style. And then on the flip side, don't be afraid to show your game to other people. The process, the success comes from that iteration process and going over and over and over again and doing the things and doing the work. Somebody else is not going to take your idea. It's just not worth it. The idea is not valuable enough. It's the execution that matters. And so being able to sort of have something written down and being able to kind of go through that process is key to kind of getting down this path.
Game design to me, from the outside seems like such an esoteric thing, right? Like it's, there's these sort of nerdy, I keep teasing you with this, but like nerdy kind of tabletop games. It's like this own kind of like little niche world. And obviously there's some decent number of people who play them and a much smaller number of people who create them. But the lessons that you're describing from your own life and now, for being a game designer, right? Show your work, write stuff down, but especially this idea of like starting with something that already exists and kind of making your own riff on it. I mean, that's musicians, right? Start as cover bands often, or at least even if they don't start as like an official cover band, they'll play their favorite. Anyone who's ever picked up a guitar didn't start by like writing sheet music, right? Or like a guitar tab. They started by like playing something that they liked. I mean, it was like Nirvana for me when I was a teenager, right? That was like the inspiration to grab the instrument. Painters, right? You learn technique by copying the artists that you love, or just the greats who came before you. And I never thought about it that way, but it totally makes sense when you say it, even for game design, right? It's like, oh, I love this game, but I would do this a little bit differently. This is how I would make it.
The exact same thing. Like we talked about Ascension, right? 10th anniversary of Ascension is tomorrow when we're recording this thing, right? You know what I did for Ascension? There was another deck building game out there called Dominion, which had this sort of principle of like, you start with a basic deck and you build a better deck throughout the course of play all in one box. I thought that's awesome. But what would be really cool is if it was like, instead of all the stuff being available at the beginning and set up, if it was random and you just had a deck of cards that was like, you only saw a couple of the cards at a time and they were constantly changing. And so my first prototype of Ascension was I shuffled Dominion deck together and dealt it out and saw what happened and got the heart of like the gist of it. And I was like, okay, well, what I would need to do to make this work is XYZ thing. And then I made my own prototype and then I, kind of went down from there. But it was as simple as that. Like, and so I just want to demystify the process. And as you said, this is not just for game designers. And that it's sort of the thing when I say think like a game designer, yes, the book is primarily targeted at game designers, but it is really about the creative process and these things. And I learned these lessons the hard way. We started telling this story when I had to go from being, we glossed over this part a little bit, but when I go from being a law student and a, former pro game player to being a game designer, I was terrified about that. Like, what is it that, aren't there creative people out there? Like, I didn't think of myself as a creative person. I was an analytical person. But once I started reading books about it, I started talking to other people about it. And it's like, no, it's just a process. Creativity is just a process. If you follow this process, you will be creative. Everybody has creativity in them. It is not some magic hidden thing out there. All right. It's process. It's work. It's not going to happen for free. Right. A lot of people are like, oh, I had this idea for a game. Why don't let's make it and you pay me 10%. Like, okay, well, it doesn't work that way either. It doesn't work that way either. You got to work. But it's not magic. It's a simple process and you just got to follow it. True for business, true for books, true for games, true for all of it.
That's what's coming through to me over and over as we're talking about this is how much of like how obscure some of these domains are and yet how universal all of these principles are. Like I will probably never try to make my own version of Magic the Gathering. But as we're talking, like there's just, light bulbs going off over and over in my head as you're saying things. I'm like, yeah, that reminds me of either something that's already happened in my life or things that I know I should be doing. And especially the one that keeps coming up over and over is this idea of iteration that you keep coming back to, that like make something and then make it better, make something and then make it better, or figure out how it could be better, or do one version of it or one test of it. Is that something that you were taught at some point, or how did you come across this idea of this iteration loop and is that specific to games, or does that apply in general?
Creativity principle. It's echoed in a lot of books. I think one of the ones that was most impactful for me was Whack on the Side of the Head. I forget the author's name, but it's like a book on creativity, and it sort of talks about these kinds of principles. I think it's like he described it as there's these four roles. There's like the artist, the judge, the warrior. I think there's one more. No, but it's
I
like
see why this book would resonate with you.
The first step of being like
choose your character.
The artist doesn't censor. The artist lets you, just all ideas are fair game. Just kind of check out. Oh, the explorer. Explorer is go find things in the world and really like try to expose yourself to as many ideas as possible. The artist is creative and like let anything goes. Like open up your mind, don't censor yourself. The judge is the censoring, right? This like process. Okay, I'm going to take all the crazy ideas. I'm going to filter them down into just the few and the things that I think could actually work. And then the warrior is that like, okay, I got to iterate. I got to put it out there. I got to be willing to kind of go and try and go and do again. I remember that really stuck with me. It was whatever, 20 years ago or whatever. I read that thing now. It was, and that some of that formed the foundation of the core design loop as I describe it. And so that kind of, those principles were around to be discovered even back then.
Probably the single biggest takeaway for me from knowing you is just like you've become a sort of voice in my head that just tells me every time I start thinking of an idea or something I want to do or something I'm supposed to be doing, it's just like to stop being so precious about it, right? And stop building it up into this giant thing of like, oh yeah, I have this idea that one day I'm going to do X, and to just like tear that down into a tiny manageable chunk and like ship that one little chunk, right? Just do that first thing and then put it out there in the world somehow, right? It's not enough to just think about it. Somehow put it out in the world, test that, give it to somebody else. Hey, what do you think of this thing? It kind of sucks, but is this going in a direction that's useful? Just do some little bit of that and then just keep making it better, as opposed to building it up into this huge thing that you'll never actually do.
Yeah.
And
it's this
again, de-risking
ideas that happens in the world that is really dangerous. The idea is at most 10% of what's going on. It's the execution that is 90% plus. You need to be able to, and in order to execute, you just got to be willing to put stuff out there. There's no, I wish there was an easier way. I wish there was a better way, but I don't know of it. And so that part really matters. And again, I'm not saying, it's a simple lesson, not necessarily an easy lesson, right? Even when I move into new domains, that's hard for me to do, right? Writing a book was very intimidating for me because I'd never done it before and I wasn't really sure what to put it out there. So what I did was I broke it down into smaller chunks and I wrote blog posts every week, and I would get feedback on the blog posts and see how those went and refine from there. And after I had enough content of that, then I could put it together and put it all into a book. And so like any way you can think of to take your big, scary, big, hairy, audacious goal, right, and break it down into smaller chunks that you can validate and get out there and move forward with, the better. I think it just makes life a lot easier and makes even the big, scary things more approachable. And you don't always have to know the whole path, right? This is the sort of Martin Luther King paraphrase, right? You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step, is one of my favorites. And it just, that a bias towards action is another one of the principles I live by. That's just, you could think about stuff forever and ruminate on ideas and constantly be like, researching and trying to figure it out and trying to make it better and trying to improve it, because you want to protect yourself, right? You don't want to put something out there that's embarrassing or that fails. And so the more you can kind of just be like, nope, look, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get it better every time. And it's okay. The more you're going to be able to do and the happier you're going to be in the long run, even if it's sometimes painful in the short run.
I think this is a perfect place to leave it on this advice. Thank you, of course, for your time, for joining, for sharing all of this. For anyone who wants to become a game designer, or as you say, think like a game designer, because again, I think these principles are universal. What's the best thing to start with? You've got a lot of stuff out in the world. Where do I go?
You can go and find the podcast on any of the popular podcast players, or the book in any of the places where books get sold. So all that stuff is available. Again, the podcast is totally free. And then we have the course will be live soon. You can join my mailing list where I put out a lot of different game design tips and things in the back. You can find more of that at justingary.com. And I'm also available online at Twitter at Justin_Gary. I'm always happy to help people that are on this path. It's very hard to get started, but it's really awesome once you start kind of really moving down and doing that thing that you're excited about and passionate about. So anybody out there that is passionate about this stuff, I strongly recommend, get started, make something, have fun with it, and, tag me, let me know how it goes.